They shoved the iron prybar under the flagstone and scraped away peat until the blade struck wood, and then metal. Joran grunted and the stone rocked. Black soil spilled into the chronicler's palms and something hard slid free with a wet, corking sound. The occult chronicler lifted the object by its peat. Wrapped cloth and a horned silhouette revealed itself beneath damp lining. Suspicion tightened his jaw. He had come to this parish to prove quiet persistence, not to hold the evidence in his hand. He kept his voice low. Hold the lamp, Joran. Slow they worked by the narrow beam of a tallow lamp in the crypt's side aisle. The chronicler's fingers brushed peat and wet linen. The amulet smelled of damp earth and beeswax. He thumbed the ridged horn and felt a shallow incision, where a simple cross had been carved over spirals. The cut was recent enough to catch the lamp light in a bright line. A cross on horn, Joran, someone tried to Christian it. The chronicler's eyes moved across the token and back to the cut. The first emotion that had driven him here, suspicion, bent into something sharper. A need to know what and who had hidden this. He closed the folio across his knees and, by habit, checked his brass magnifier on its chain. He had catalogued votive tokens for nearly 30 years and had learned to name the exact sound peat makes when metal is freed. Each of his movements stopped the cold from spreading into his hands. He journeyed to lift the flagstone back into place, but not to press it down. The chronicler held the amulet against the lamp and traced the spiral marks with a gloved fingertip. Maren will know these spirals, he said. She keeps songs that match this stitchwork. They crept out through the nave as a bell murmured vespers from the village church tower. The chronicler kept his voice measured and small. He had not planned for witnesses. He had planned for records. But the parish doors were unlocked and Father Ansel's shadow blocked the threshold like a hand. "What are you doing in the church at this hour?" Father Ansel demanded, his coat smelling of beer and coal. He reached in and touched the lamp without asking. His eyes fell to the wet cloth to the horn. "Hand it here," he said. His hands were quick. A tight exchange followed. "Father Ansel, please." "Wait," said the chronicler. "This is an archaeological matter." "Archaeological." The priest laughed without humor. "We do not dig relics at midnight." Joran moved to shield the amulet, and the chronicler felt Joran's shoulder press against his ribs. The priest's voice rose. "You bring scandal to my parish." Maren stepped from the side aisle and put a palm on the priest's sleeve. Her voice was a dry, steady thing. "Ansel, don't he break it in the nave?" Maren's hands smelled of smoke and stew. She had been the village elder longer than most had lived in the cottages that ringed the green. She did not step forward to take the object. She smiled at the chronicler, as if he were a man who had brought bad weather into a warm house. Her claim arrived not as accusation but as a fact. "We have kept tokens like that for generations," she said. Her eyes moved to the amulet. "We call them thresholds. We hide them where the church will not burn them, and the house will not forget them." The chronicler noted how her fingers flexed and unclenched around nothing. They moved to the sacristy where a single lamp sat on a table of rough wood. The chronicler took the amulet from Joran and set it between folios and notes. He read the carved cross again where spiral lines had been incised over the top. He lifted the magnifier. The grooves were filed in a disciplined hand. "Not crude zeal but careful concealment. These spirals are older than this parish," he said. The cross was added to claim it. Maren watched and folded her hands into the sleeves of her shawl. "We do not call them gods in words the priest would accept," she said. "We put them into saints' pockets. We hang them on hearths. We bury them under altars so the church will think we left them behind." Father Ansel's forehead creased when the chronicler described the incisions. "That's superstition," he said. "We must destroy such things. The bishop would order removal and cleansing. This object could bring disgrace." His voice hardened into threat. "Hand it to me now, or I'll send for the bishop's emissary tomorrow." Joran's grip tightened. "You can burn what we keep, Ansel. You will not be the one to take it away." Maren's chin lifted. She met the priest's mouth with the flat of her stare. The chronicler could feel the next shift in the room. Suspicion had become a quiet form of fear among the villagers. They agreed to wait until daybreak, but Father Ansel insisted the amulet be locked in the vestry. The chronicler recorded the situation in his folio with a careful hand. The location, the time, the characters present, the physical description. He wrote the words and then crossed them because he knew the ledger's contents could be weaponized. He placed a wax dab over the folio's corner and pressed his signet ring into it. Joran carried the amulet to the vestry. He kept his shoulders hunched as if someone might seize him by the collar. He did not speak for a long time. When he did, his voice was a single line. "If the bishop comes, they will search every hearth." Morning filled the village with wind and a dry grey light that showed gutters and singed thatch. The chronicler followed the procession from the church to the green because he could not yet decide whether to publish the finding or to protect it. The feast of Saint Edric had been scheduled for months. The minister singers rehearsed in the choir. On the green, villagers wore soon masks and carried a painted effigy of the saint. The chronicler stood at the edge and watched hands lift bouquets, watched the effigy's painted smile tilt as the crowd circled. He saw, in gesture after gesture, the ritual he had trained to recognize. The wreath placed on a hillock, the offering of bread, and the small, rhythmic stomp that matched hilltop rites written in his folio. They are acting the old story, he whispered to Joran. The procession's gestures matched the amulet's spiral. Maren moved within the crowd and touched 3 households' thresholds with a horned token hidden in her palm. She placed a coin with a carved spiral beneath a cottage lintel and then slipped into the churchyard to watch. The chronicler kept his distance and took notes. He watched a child grin as an elder set a bowl out at the green sedge. The child's small hand flexed around a pebble etched with a spiral. The chronicler's suspicion moved into clarity. Public worship had been preserved through pageantry. The villagers had not let the old forms die. They had painted them with saintly faces. After the procession, Father Ansel found the chronicler in the nave and spoke with tightened throat. "You will not publish this," he said. "If the bishop learns of horned tokens beneath our altar, he will demand purging. The village will be fined. Families will be shamed." The chronicler felt a new emotion, doubt, arrive as a practical pressure. He imagined the bishop's emissaries rifling through chests and burning amulets in carts behind the church. "Do you fear the bishop more than you fear the truth?" he asked. Ansel's reply was a single word, both. They moved to the vicarage parlor and spoke across a table of carved oak. The chronicler kept his posture straight and clinical. He wanted to argue history. Ansel wanted stability. "You must destroy it, Ansel. I will not have scandal here." Maren's voice arrived at the doorway. "You will only drive them out if you burn what feeds them," she said. "You think destruction will stop it, Ansel. The tokens will appear in pots and bread ovens the next morning. You can burn one altar. You cannot burn the work of hands." The chronicler watched Ansel's mouth twitch. He was trying to choose between discipline and dominion. The chronicler decided to expose the amulet during evening vespers. He knew his plan. He would not let a private destruction be made official without village witness. He sat in the nave and placed his notes on the bench. He felt the old motion of a scholar preparing a lecture. The movement steadied him. At vespers the church smelled of boiled barley and tallow. Voices rose in a simple chant, and the congregation's breathing matched the hymn's long lines. During the prayer he slid to the altar, lifted the frontal cloth, and set the horned amulet on the carved stone so that the candled light glinted off the beeswax. Father Ansel reacted as the chronicler expected, and as the chronicler hoped he would not. He surged forward and grabbed the amulet. "You will not make a mockery of this church," he said, and raised the token as if to hurl it into the brazier. Maren and a group of villagers formed between the priest and the brazier. "Stop, Ansel, Joran, you will not burn this in front of everyone." A standoff unfolded in the nave. Hands closed on wooden pews. Someone knocked a hymn book to the floor. The chronicler felt his pulse tighten. The public rupture ignited in the smell of soot and wet wool. 3 rapid lines of argument snapped across the aisle. "Give it to me," Ansel ordered. No, Marin answered. "You will not take our tokens. You will set this village on fire if you burn that, Joran." The chronicler stepped between them and spoke in a voice meant to hold facts rather than to inflame feeling. "The amulet proves continuity. Burning it will not erase the forms. It will only scatter them into homes." Ansel's hand trembled. "I will call the bishop," he said. "Call him then," Marin replied. The exchange lasted less than a minute, but it changed the village's equilibrium. Authority split in 2 directions. A scuffle broke out when Ansel tried to seize the token from Marin's pocket. A villager shoved Ansel's shoulder and his sleeve caught candle wax. Someone screamed as light flared. Joran shoved the priest back and a wooden bench toppled. The chronicler moved to wedge himself between the men and felt someone knock his elbow with a curved forearm. The brass magnifier clinked and fell to the floor. The amulet slipped free from wrappings and rolled under the altar rail. Hands reached. One villager's fingers closed on the horned curve and hid it in a fist. A sharp sound, metal on stone, caused the choir to stop mid-phrase. The chronicler could not immediately tell who had the token. By dawn, the official altar had been cleared of the amulet, and the bishop's involvement was implied by a tannish letter left at the vicarage gate. The chronicler read the thin lines and felt the village's protections narrow. But when he walked the lanes at first light, he saw small horns tucked beneath doormats and pinned to children's cloaks. Marin moved quietly from threshold to threshold, leaving a carved pebble here, a small horn there, and slipping a ribbon with a spiral into a baker's basket. "They will not be gone," she said. She did not look back when a woman crossed the lane and whispered thanks. Joran watched the exchanges and then met the chronicler's gaze. "They are moving, not dying," he said. At noon, the chronicler returned to his study and recorded the episode in the folio. He chose his words with the same care he had used in the sacristy. Precise, catalogue, sealed. He could hand the folio to the bishop and see purges follow. He could also map the network of hidden deities and trust the village to keep the tokens. The decision arrived as an ache behind his eyes, something like fatigue pressed into practical resolve. He slid the horn token into his satchel instead of the church chest. He wrapped it again in waxed cloth and tucked it behind folios labeled "Domestic Rites." The chapter closes with a quiet redistribution already in motion. By dusk, small horned charms sit in hearths, pinned to children's cloaks, and tucked beneath the lintels of newly thatched roofs. The chronicler writes a final line in his folio, seals it with wax, and puts the seal back into his satchel. He does not publish the find. He chooses preservation. He files a copy of the description under a false parish code and marks the original for private reference. The last sound is the snap of the folio's strap and the soft step of Joran leaving the study. "We keep what we can," Marin him the next morning. When she came to fetch a small carved pebble they had agreed to return. "We keep what keeps us." The chronicler nodded and felt the emotion shift once more, from doubt into guarded resolve. And in that resolve he made a choice that will shape how the hidden deities survive. A carved horn thudded onto the damp turf and rolled beneath a pilgrim's boot. Suspicion tightened the occult chronicler's jaw as he watched the procession edge past the saint's effigy, the hallow catching peat, born candlelight. He moved forward, cloak wet at the hem, and the crowd shifted to leave space without invitation. "Elder Marin," he called, voice low and steady, "what do you call that token?" The question landed like a stone. Within 5 breaths the green smelled of peat smoke and silence. The central problem was visible and immediate. An old rite passing as a saint's offering, and a community choosing concealment over confession. The occult chronicler had come to the village with the peat, wrapped object from the hill fort still in his satchel. He had opened it in his hands the week before and found a horned carving joined to a strip of linen folded around a reliquary pin. He kept that memory close. It guided each step. He did not announce his credentials. He showed the ring on his finger and the brass magnifier chain, and he let those small facts do the work of a name. Joran stood beside him, shoulders set, eyes on the procession. "Joran, do you know these people?" "The chronicler?" Joran answered with a short sound. "I know many of them." He did not nod. His jaw worked. The chronicler felt the first shift, from suspicion to a tight impatience that made his fingers rough on his folio. He had expected evasions. He had not expected ritual choreography. The procession moved with a slow, rehearsed rhythm. A wooden effigy of the saint rode a crude bier, flowers stuck in weathered nails. Masks hid faces, ties of cloth stained with dew, soon eye-holes that let villagers watch without recognition. Elder Marin clasped the horned token with 2 hands and set it at the saint's feet. No bells rang. No priest cut the line. People crossed themselves and muttered. The chronicler stepped nearer and saw the token's carved lines. Curling antlers, incised eyes, a hairline crack filled with old resin. Marin, the chronicler, nearer this time. Why hide behind the saint? His tone held measured accusation. The first public confrontation arrived in the middle of the green. Several nearby villagers tightened their stances. Elder Marin blinked. "Why hide?" she echoed. Her voice had practiced softness. "We protect the fields. We thank the saint for lambing." "Is that a crime?" She lifted the token slightly, fingers rough with work. Her answer failed to satisfy. The chronicler's suspicion pushed into quiet frustration. One of the masked villagers answered before Marin could. "There is danger in too much showing. The clergy watch the altars now. We keep things to ourselves." He lowered his head. The chronicler watched the man's hands. They trembled a fraction and then steadied. The second emotional shift arrived, from impatience to a narrow, cold clarity that the concealment was deliberate and defensive. "Joran," the chronicler, voice low. "Who taught this?" Joran did not reply at once. He had been the one who pried the flagstone in the last dig. The memory of that morning sat in the chronicler's throat. Peat, iron, the wet cork of earth, the scrap of linen coming away from a carved horn. He had seen an object like this before he arrived, and that sight had sent him here. A woman in the procession, Edda, stepped forward and lowered her hood. "We do what keeps the green safe," she said. Her words were small but held a ledger of meaning. "Hunger, cold winters, a fear of the bishop's edict. We use the saint so we can keep the token. We bury it in the saint when the bishop comes. It stays for the fields." It is simple. The chronicler watched her hands as she spoke. They did not tremble. The villagers dispersed without the scene boiling into violence. The chronicler and Joran followed 2 men away from the green, keeping distance but not letting the thread go slack. They threaded behind the church and found Father Alaric waiting by the sacristy door. He wore a plain surplice and a careful expression. "Father Alaric, the chronicler, may I see the sacristy?" The words were clean request and gentle pressure combined. Alaric hesitated a beat and then stepped aside. The chronicler entered with measured authority. Joran stood at the threshold, boots leaving mud prints on the stone. The sacristy smelled of beeswax and old dust. Linen-wrapped bundles sat in a neat stack, and a locked chest rested under a bench. They lifted a corner of a linen. Beneath it lay a cluster of objects, carved tokens, some horned, some simple discs, and a small bundle of runic, tinged pebbles. The chronicler lifted one. "Unrecorded offerings," he said. His baritone voice dropped into study mode. "Who brought these?" The sacristan, a thin man with a hooked nose, shrugged. "People leave things. The parish cleans what it can. The rest we store." Father Alaric knows names. His hands were steady. The chronicler watched Alaric's face. The priest's mouth tightened. Alaric answered plainly, "We record relics. We do not record trinkets. We do not invite the bishop's questions. We keep the village safe." He did not say the word collusion, but the meaning hung in the room like a careful document. The chronicler felt another emotional shift, from clarity into a slow, mounting anger that settled into procedural resolve. This was not mere superstition. This was a system. After the sacristy inspection, the chronicler and Joran walked the lane toward the back alleys where tradesmen's sheds leaned into one another. They moved toward Joran's narrow house because someone there had agreed to speak. The chronicler kept his folio between his hands. He turned pages like a metronome. Outside the alley, Joran stopped and faced him. "I did the digging. Joran, no preface." His voice had the flat sound of confession and calculation together. "I did the digging because the bishop's men would have taken the tokens and burned them if they found them. I kept them from the altar. I hid them." Joran's confession landed like a small, heavy stone. The chronicler's reaction came as a tightened hold on his magnifier chain. "Why hide them, Joran?" The chronicler. He needed the answer to fit the larger pattern of ritual preservation or organized protection. Joran looked at the chronicler. "Because the people asked me. Because they feared losing the old ways that bring calves and stop fever. Because the bishop thinks old carvings are witchcraft. Because we swore an oath." The word oath changed the shape of the problem. This was not scattered superstition. It was coordinated preservation under oath. The chronicler felt the scene's stakes rise. His anger folded into a reporter's cold curiosity. They moved to a back room where Edda had agreed to wait with a single lamp. She produced from beneath a stool a small worn amulet tied to twine and a folded sketch on a scrap of vellum. She set both on the table and pushed them toward the chronicler. He lifted the amulet. The horned carving matched the one he had seen under Pete. The sketch showed a hidden carving within the saint's base. A coiled spiral antler mimic lines, a small cavity shaded in pencil. "This proves it." "Edda," she did not look up. "I traced it when I dived under the altar. I felt the hollow with my hand." Her voice was raw with that memory. The chronicler's fingers tightened around the amulet. His study, calm, fractured into a guarded exhilaration. He had needed proof that clerical storage and village rites overlapped in the same object. He had it now. Edda them the pattern of the last months. Offerings placed at night, a secret rota of keepers, parish records smoothed over. She named faces. She named days. The chronicler wrote as she spoke. Every few lines of her speech, he looked up and asked for names. Dialogue carried the plot forward with short sentences that chiseled fact from fear. That night they came to the locked side chapel. A councilman barred the door and cited orders. "You cannot enter," he said. "Those are private devotions." The chronicler examined the councilman. He had the look of a man carrying a fragile civic plan. He also had hands that avoided dust. "We only want to look." The chronicler. "I only want to document." The councilman spat a little on the stones. "Documentation invites audits. Audits invite the bishop." His face turned to a stubborn refusal, and the encounter sharpened into a power struggle that did not depend on blows but on access. The chronicler could not force the lock. They left the chapel with feet heavier than when they'd come. Edda followed them into the lane, cheeks bright from exertion. "There is a cavity there," she said. "I felt wood that did not belong to any saint I know. I felt a nail bored into the base like a seam." Her information changed their plan. This was no longer a search for trinkets at random. This was a deliberate concealment inside a reliquary. At midnight the chronicler and Joran returned. They brought wedges and a small pry bar, tools that smelled of oil and iron. They moved in silence toward the chapel where the stone base met the saint. The chronicler's heart beat with a measured professional intensity. He worked the pry bar into the seam and levered. Wood creaked. Dust fell like dry ash, and the seam widened. They exposed a cavity small as a child's shoe. Inside, wrapped in linen, lay a fused object, a horned carving bound to a narrow metal reliquary, the two items pressed together for reasons of reverence or convenience. As the chronicler lifted it, the linen came away and a scrap of worn cloth with faded embroidery fell free. The chronicler smelled old grace and the resin of sap. His hands felt a quick, animal response, unease sharpened by the knowledge of what such an object could mean. An acolyte returned at that moment, pausing in the doorway with a lamp held high. He froze. "What are you doing?" he demanded. The lamp threw a hard circle of light. The chronicler held the object up. The acolyte's face went from confusion to alarm in a breath. Father Alaric came next, old slippers whispering on stone. Words came hot and urgent. "Father, look. The chronicler. This combines a relic with an older carving. Who authorized this?" Alaric's face moved through a register of guilt, relief, and a tired pragmatism. "We did it to keep the people safe," he said. "We did it to stop the bishop from taking them entirely. We bound them so we could control them." The exchange turned into a tight argument. The chronicler demanded transparency. Alaric defended discretion. Joran bristled with protective anger. Rapid lines of dialogue moved between them, 6 short responses fired in sequence, each one landing like a struck flint. "You hid a thing of worship, the chronicler. You hid it under the saint. You risked my record and the bishop's wrath to do so." Alaric's hands rose. "And you would strip us of it." The words bluntly. "You would hand them to men who burn what they do not understand." The argument exposed a deeper split. The bishop says law versus the village's survival strategy. The acolyte refused to leave. He held the lamp steady and watched the object. "What if the bishop knows?" he asked. His voice had the small, precise edge of someone who feared reprisal. The chronicler looked at the acolyte and saw a boy forced into adult consequences. The room's emotion shifted from accusation to a wary calculation about risk and preservation. In the pre-dawn hush they made a pact of practicality. The chronicler documented the object thoroughly, drawings, notes, measurements, and then, at Edda's insistence, they agreed to return it to the cavity. The chronicler insisted on exact wording for a record he placed sealed in his folio. Father Alaric promised to mark the ledger with a neutral entry. Joran and Edda agreed to the concealment but demanded safeguards. A roster of watchers, a promise that no outsider would be permitted access. Each promise was a small, binding action rather than a speech. They wrapped the horned object again in linen and pressed it back into the cavity. The chronicler felt his palms cool as he set the final wedge. He replaced the stone, tamped peat into the seam, and swept dust over his tracks. The decision resolved the chapter's immediate conflict. Exposure had been avoided. But the solution also cemented a shared secret that altered the relations between church and village. Before they left, the chronicler placed one copy of his sketches into his folio and handed another to Edda. "Keep this safe," he told her. "Hide it where only the circle knows." She nodded without ceremony. The chronicler watched her pockets close over the paper. He felt the last emotional shift in the chapter, from mounting fear into a sober, focused guardedness. Their actions would protect the token and preserve the rite, but they also created a future pressure point. As they filed back down toward the green, Joran touched the scar along his brow, a small, practiced motion that revealed his fatigue more than any spoken line. Edda looked straight ahead, hands folded tight. Father Alaric walked with a measured, wary gait. The chronicler kept his folio open, reading his own handwriting by the lamp's memory. He could not erase what he had seen. He could only record it. They did not announce the find. They agreed to silence. The chronicler left the village before dawn, his cloak damp and his list of names longer than when he had arrived. He had proof, he had witnesses, and he had a registrar filled with neat script. The chapter closed not with an elegy but with a concrete, physical sound. The councilman striking the chapel door shut with a key, and the click echoing in the early street. That single action sealed the discovery, and the pact that bound them to keep it hidden. He slid his gloved hand beneath the altar slab and felt a hard, peat, dark horn press into his fingertips. Suspicion tightened the occult chronicler's jaw. He kept his hand flat against the stone, feeling peat crumble into his palm, while a woman in the front pew cried out. The parishioner who grabbed his sleeve hissed, "What have you found?" And the chronicler answered by lifting the amulet free, black with earth and shaped like a curling goat's horn. In that small, immediate action the central problem made itself plain. Objects placed under the saint's altar suggested deliberate concealment of an older practice beneath the church surface. He did not wait for a greeting. The chapel smelled of burnt tallow and damp wood. He had read about tokens hidden under altars, but he had never been the man to pull one into view during Vespers. He kept his voice level. "This is not a relic of the parish," he said. "It is an offering." His tone hardened when a whisper ran through the nave. In the first 5 sentences suspicion had been named and recorded. It governed his choices. He felt it as a physical pressure that made his hands move faster, his fingers lift cleaner, his eyes search the faces in the dim pew light. Joran stepped forward and muttered, "You dug before, chronicler. You brought trouble." The chronicler let Joran's name hang in the eisel. The man who had pried flagstones in the field earlier that week now stood with peat on his boots. The congregation swayed between accusation and curiosity. The village priest came down the eisel with his stole loosened and his lips pressed thin. "Father Thomas," someone said, and the priest's expression closed like a door. The priest demanded the object with a voice that kept breaking between authority and panic. "Hand it over, chronicler." "How did you come by that?" He stepped within arm's length and leaned his palms on the carved pew, the way a man measures a room by touch. The chronicler held the horn at arm's length. "It was beneath the altar," he said. "I felt it under the flagstone when I checked the footing. It belongs with offerings to an older household power, not to the saint on this altar." The priest's fingers tightened across the rim of the pew. Suspicion shifted in the crowd into accusation. A woman moved. She wore a woolen kerchief and carried the scent of boiled barley and tobacco. The eldress's lined face showed more fatigue than fear. The eldress stepped onto the steps and did not raise her voice. "You dig the earth and find what we keep," she said. "These tokens are not worship of the devil. They are hearth keepers. They go to the cow and to the oven and to the child's sleep." Her words steadied some people. The chronic tension in the room folded into a murmur of defense. Some hands went to the tokens at their belts, others to the child on their knees. The chronicler listened. He had come to this village because of traces. A carved horn unearthed in damp peat in the barrow earlier, a procession that had worn a saint's effigy like a pagan mask. He remembered the iron prybar scraping at the flagstone, and the black soil spilling into his palm in a different field. Those were not abstract traces, but the same pattern repeated. "We have found more than one token." Joran found a horn by the ridge. "Tonight this is another." "These are linked." His voice stayed measured. He chose facts to steady an argument rather than to incite. The priest answered with a clipped laugh. "So you claim conspiracy. You claim the village keeps idols under the altar." Father Thomas' tone was accusation and a command. The chronicler stepped closer to the nave and let the amulet hang between his gloved fingers. "I claim continuity," he said. "I claim that what you call saints have become vessels for older rites. Those who care for the fields still care for the house. Gods." The priest's jaw worked. Words in the nave turned to whispered names. "Enya," someone said. The chronicler felt the apprentice breath behind his shoulder. Enya had come with him earlier that dusk to record the service. She kept her hands folded on the edge of his cloak like a child holding onto a parent's sleeve. He nodded to her. She passed him a small notebook and an inked pencil, and he began to mark what he had taken from beneath the stone. The act of writing calmed him. Facts listed and dates noted. This was how he worked when suspicion hardened into a case. When the priest demanded the amulet again, Joran stepped between them. "You want to take that from us, Father?" Joran. His voice was blunt, a peasant's cadence worn by field. "Son, you preach about souls and tithers. And when we put a charm for calves, you would break our house open." Several parishioners echoed the word break as if the fear of external punishment had lodged in them. The room bristled. The chronicler felt the tenor of emotions shift from suspicion to protective defiance. The eldress kept her eyes on the chronicler and Joran both. "Listen to me," she said. "You have no right to drag these into the light and bring magistrates. We keep what keeps the bread." Her voice did not plead. It stated duty. The chronicler had a choice. He could unseal the matter and invite formal inquiry, which would protect doctrine and risk destroying the villagers' practices. Or he could conceal the find and let the people continue their rites. He measured the villagers, the priest, and the elders like an archaeologist weighing fragile layers. After Vespers, the procession left the green in a line of low, voiced song. The chronicler followed with Enya and Joran, keeping to the dark edge where hedges cast a low fence of leaves. His boots sank into wet turf, and the moon hung like an unpolished coin. They trailed masks and candlelight until the procession slowed at the ring of stones beyond the long barrow. He watched the saint's effigy lifted atop poles, and with a practiced eye, saw how the halo was worn like a mask. The procession circled the stones, and the chronicler felt his suspicion shift again into a sharper, almost academic wonder. The saint was being used as object and costume, not merely object of veneration. They approached close enough to hear the leader chant. The leader wore a wooden mask, and his cloak bore a sigil stitched in thread frayed by peat and handling. The chronicler's pulse shortened. He signaled to Enya to stay quiet and to Joran to keep the lantern low. The masked figure moved with the rhythm of the song, unpeeling gestures that matched phrases neither the chronicler nor Enya recognized. The villagers bowed to the effigy and placed small tokens against the sandal prints in the grass. A man stepped forward from the circle and raised his voice. "By the old blessings," he said, and the word landed like a stone. Father Thomas had followed them. The priestess' face looked older in moonlight, and he brought the weight of the church behind him. "Step away. You will not make mockery of the liturgy here," the masked leader answered only with movement. Then, abruptly, the man removed the mask. The face beneath was known to them all. It was Joran, the man who had pried flagstones and who stood now with peat on his boots, and the same blunt mouth. A small gasp moved through the ring. The chronicler felt the world pivot on that unmasking. The masquerade had a leader from the village's working circle, not an outsider or a foreign agent. Joran's jaw set. He did not look like a conspirator torn from a book. He looked like the man who patched nets and helped wheel the cart in market. Father Thomas took 2 steps forward, then stopped. His authority had been a threat. Now it had a different angle. "Joran," the priest asked, "why would you lead this?" Joran faced him. "Because, Father, you come at night and take the tithes, and we keep what keeps calves and children. Who else will do the work?" The exchange was short and sharp. 3 lines of argument flared between them, then closed. The chronicler watched the loyalties rearrange themselves in the moonlight. The villagers' allegiance wavered between the priest's letter and the practical protections Joran and the eldress had promised for years. The priest tried to stop the rite by threatening ecclesiastical sanction. "I will bring the bishop's word," he said. "I will strip any man who leads a blasphemous ceremony of office." The leader's answer was a low laugh from Joran. "You could take my plough away, Father Joran. But who will feed the parish then? Who will mend the thatch when you ride with your surcoat?" The crowd shifted against the threat, as if a physical hand had moved them. The chronicler recorded the argument with tight lines in his notebook, marking who spoke and what each demanded. He felt emotion move in the crowd from defense to calculation. When the confrontation threatened to fragment, the eldress stepped between Joran and Father Thomas. She spoke not to the priest but to the parishioners. "We have given bread and help to the church for years," she said. "We will not let an outsider come and tear what keeps our fields." Her words turned anger away from the chronicler and back toward the idea of enforcement from outside. The villagers began to murmur in protection of their own. The chronicler realized that decisions would be made in private as much as in public. He watched alliances harden before his eyes. Later, at the edge of the stones, the priest tried a different tactic. He offered a bargain: allow the rites to continue if certain tokens were surrendered and agreed restrictions observed. The masked leader, Joran, listened. He ran one hand over the horn at his belt and considered the price of compliance. Some tokens handed in, some kept hidden. A new emotion came into the chronicler's chest, not only suspicion but a reluctant respect for negotiation. He saw that the village had reached a live compromise where doctrine and habit had to coexist. They returned toward the church under a thin, silvering sky. The chronicler waited at the altar and watched the interactions form into a kind of treaty. He had a new decision to make. At the center of the chapel, the zealot parishioner, one who had once shouted for strictness in the market, lunged for the amulet with fingers that sought to tear it away. Joran moved first to shield it, and a scrap of cloth tore on the altar step. The chronicler reached down and braced himself between the zealot and the amulet. The room dissolved into a scramble of arms, heels scraping stone, a child's cry, the candle flame knocked low. There were quick, violent lines of dialogue amid the scramble.
"Let it go!"
Father Thomas shouted, "You are defiling the altar. Keep your hands off." Joran snapped, "We will not give up what keeps our hearths."
"You will bring the sheriff!"
The zealot hissed. The exchange lasted in tight bursts, 3 to 5 rapid lines back and forth, the kind of argument that decides things by force. The chronicler felt his palms burn where someone had gripped his sleeve. His breath came in short pulls. He moved to shield the amulet while Enya slipped forward and pressed her body against the altar rail to steady herself. The struggle ended without blood but with the shrine in disarray. Wax dripped in one gutter, a small carved saint's hand had split near the wrist, and the amulet lay uncovered on the step. The chronicler made a decision then. He could take the object and register it, giving it to a magistrate and ending the villagers' practice, but causing likely arrests and lasting harm, or he could conceal the token, record it in his private folio, and leave the villagers to their masked rites. He felt his hands close. His pulse slowed. He thought of the iron pry bar and the peat, stuffed cloth they had pulled from the barrow weeks before. He thought of the carved horn thudding onto damp turf in the procession, and how the saint's halo had gleamed when they paraded it through the green. He replaced the amulet under the step with deliberate movements. The act of covering the object was not a surrender to superstition. It was a choice shaped by the people who depended on those charms. He wrote his decision in the folio with a clean, unemotional note. The token recovered, condition noted, placed back under step to preserve the village as practice absent immediate cruelty. That line was not a moral flourish, but a logistical sentence. What he recorded determined what he would do later if higher authorities demanded evidence. In the pre-dawn, with the chill pressing into his coat, he sealed the folio and tucked it into his satchel. Joran stood nearby with his hands in his sleeves, and the eldress watched him with a small, firm nod. Enya rubbed her palms together and light outlined her jaw. The priest did not speak. He watched as if counting losses. The chronicler felt an ache, not sentimental but practical. He had chosen concealment to prevent outside force from breaking small arrangements that kept children fed. Before he left, he took one more step to the altar and smoothed the flagstone with fingers that tasted of dust and ink. He thought of earlier discoveries, the peat, wrapped object Joran had delivered weeks before, and the horn he had seen roll beneath a pilgrim's boot. The unmasking of the procession leader had been the twist that changed how he understood the village. The leaders of both superstition and law were not strangers, but the same group of hands that mended nets and taught children to read the Lord's Prayer. When the church doors closed behind him, the chronicler did not write a triumphant note. He wrote the facts, the names, and the bargains made. He did not promise to return or to be the guardian of the people's rights. He only recorded that he had chosen to conceal the token and why. He tucked the folio back into its leather wrap, snapped the brass magnifier into place on its chain, and shouldered his satchel. As the first rooster called the men to work, he walked away from the church and toward the road, feeling the weight of choice in his satchel and the weight of a sealed record in his chest. The villagers would go on holding their masked processions, placing tokens, and bargaining with priests. He had resolved the chapter's immediate conflict. He had stopped the shrine's destruction without handing the village to outside sanctions. The chronic suspicion that had driven him to pry flagstones had become, for the moment, protection. He had exchanged exposure for quiet continuance, and the moral cost of that exchange settled in his hands like cold metal as he closed the church gate behind him.